Welcome back to Apocalypse Steve and day 2 of this unreliable tale. Last episode saw the start of Steve's adventure as he found himself extremely ill-equipped and semi-naked in rural Arizona during the zombie apocalypse. Thankfully, with some guidance from a local trader named Joel,
Name's Trader Joel,
Steve managed to craft a few essentials and find shelter for the night. That shelter is a gun store by the name of Shotgun Messiah, and that is where our story continues now. Steve did not have the most peaceful of nights. Finding himself on the floor of a strange warehouse with the constant moaning of zombies outside wasn't the most soothing of experiences, but Steve's spirits remain high regardless. He managed to get a few hours of shut-eye, but with the knowledge of daybreak being at 4 AM, he was pacing in the minutes beforehand, raring to crack on with his day. Shotgun Messiah, now clear of Zeds, was likely full of glorious loot, so that was Steve's first port of call. At the stroke of 4, Steve headed back into the store, excited to gather up as much treasure as he could. With no time to waste, he searched fridges, gun racks, display cabinets, absolutely no stone left unturned. Outside, there was plenty more ammo to be found by the firing range and multiple cargo crates which would surely be full of useful loot. However, the smacking of Steve's axe awoke some remaining Zeds who came out to say hello. This heavy-set fellow was feeling especially sprightly this morning and took a fair few shots to subdue.
I thought they didn't run during the day.
Steve thought. He'll be having words with Joel next time he stops by the trading post, that's for sure. After Steve thought he'd killed the last, a load more Zeds crawled out of the woodwork. Luckily, his aim was on point this morning and took out the remaining few with ease. With the explosion of the final zombie head, Steve beelined for the crates. And just in time too, as the weather seemed to take a turn. There was plenty of top-grade loot here, but one very high-tech looking container was locked tight, something Steve will have to come back to. Content with his haul, he headed back into the warehouse to consolidate his findings. Whilst only on day 2, Steve knew day 7 would approach far quicker than expected, so it was time to assemble a game plan. On the top of his list was an adequate base, and this flimsy warehouse wasn't it. So without further ado, he was out of the door and on the hunt, although this weather wasn't ideal for it. But just like that, as if it were planned, the clouds parted and the sun shone down on Steve, aiding him in his quest. He figured sticking to the main road was his best bet for now. This town surely had plenty to offer and he wouldn't want to stray too far. The first place he came across was this Poppin' Pills pharmacy.
This looks pretty secure and would have plenty of meds, that's for sure.
Steve had taken to talking to himself a fair bit already. Well, he was going to have to combat the loneliness somehow. After getting rid of a few stragglers outside, he optimistically headed inside.
This place looks pretty promising. This might be the perfect, and there's a massive hole in the roof.
Never mind, Steve. Plenty of other options, I'm sure. On his way out, he saw more potential food and, without hesitation, performed probably the greatest shot of his life.
Nice.
Still reeling from that epic shot, he ventured on and immediately spotted a unique-looking building, seemingly called Collision Center. He wasn't sure what it was, but something was drawing him to it. Time to go full sneak mode.
Sneak mode engaged.
Steve was ever so silly. Despite his dainty tiptoes, he was once again ambushed in a bathroom. He would have thought he'd learnt by now. Thankfully, he was able to fall back and take this guy out no trouble. Moving through to the kitchen, Steve had his wits about him, ready for another potential pounce. And a good job too, as here's Johnny, crashing through a cupboard door. Steve retreated once again and took aim, but this guy was jittery. One arrow on target and 2 bonks on the head, and this guy was through. After looting the kitchen and having a bite to eat, he pushed forward. He found himself in the main garage.
It's pronounced garage.
Wait, you can hear me?
Of course I can. I'm pretty sure that's one of the many reasons you're what's known as an unreliable narrator.
Well, just pretend you can't. This is getting far too meta. Steve headed into yet another bathroom, but wasn't going to be fooled by the whole toilet stall door trick this time. He delicately removed the doors from their hinges.
How did he not hear that?
One sneaky headshot and this big brute was destroyed. Steve was very quickly becoming encumbered, so decided to clear the place out before continuing his looting. This sneaky so-and-so was hiding behind a pillar and startled poor Steve. His sudden sprint across the room woke another, seemingly out of nowhere. Time for evasive action. He nailed a headshot on the first and then made a quick dodge around the second to gain some space. With space gain, Steve could take him out no problem. And now onto something that caught his eye earlier, a ladder. We all know higher ground is never a bad thing. With bow in hand, Steve cleared the 1Z guarding this gantry, a gantry Steve was liking the look of.
I do like the look of this gantry.
Steve found a key rack and unlocked a door to the outside balcony. However, before continuing, he could hear a ruckus downstairs that needed sorting. Someone was trying to get through this locked door, so Steve thought he'd give him a hand. But then he heard something that sent a shiver down his spine. Dogs. And not just any dogs, zombie dogs. Steve flew up to higher ground for a better vantage point. Dogs can't climb ladders, right? He used the top of the paint shop to parkour his way onto the raised car. This should be the perfect place to take care of those dogs. If only they weren't hiding under said car. He got a couple of good shots in, but they were proving difficult and Steve was very quickly running out of arrows. One dog down, one to go, but with only 3 arrows left, Steve was getting worried. His final 2 arrows were both successful, but not enough. What a pickle he'd found himself in. Surely this dog was nearly dead, maybe one good hit would be enough? With club in hand, Steve took a huge risk and jumped down to ground level. In a flash, they exchanged blows. Steve killed the dog, but he'd been bit and was bleeding a lot.
Shoot.
Without hesitation, he grabbed the first aid bandage out of his bag and wrapped it around his arm. The bleeding was subdued, but zombie dog or not, Steve knew he would likely have an infection, so getting antibiotics became top priority. Steve threw together a basic storage chest so he could offload the majority of his cargo. After dropping off anything non-essential, Steve continued to clear out the remainder of the building, which as far as he knew was just the roof. And yes, he was right. There were a fair few up there, so he hopped down and dealt with them accordingly, including a couple of crawlers and a horrible zombie vulture thing. Yuck. With the roof looted, he dropped off more bits and pieces before going on the hunt for antibiotics. And where better to start than the pharmacy across the road?
There must be something I can use in here. Even some honey would probably do the trick.
Steve was right. Honey would indeed do the trick. He searched every shelf in sight, and wouldn't you know, honey. Thank goodness. With the honey's natural antibiotics taking effect, Steve could breathe a sigh of relief.
Ooh.
Dying of infection on day 2 would have been a pretty poor display and a disappointingly premature end to this series. Steve originally planned to loot the rest of the pharmacy right away, but his conscience told him to rein in his nonchalance and take it easy. He's already come far too close to death today, so let's get back across the road and turn this auto shop into a base. Steve looted everything he possibly could, finding a bunch of useful things including a much better stone axe, shotgun ammo and much more. These flimsy glass doors won't keep anything out, so Steve replaced it with a makeshift door of his own, which is somehow much better. Quite the craftsman. Once again, he constructed a new back door, further securing his new base. As it turned 7:30, Steve made the decision to make the trek back to Shotgun Messiah to collect the last of his belongings he left there this morning. With all of his loot crammed into his backpack, he grabbed his sleeping bag and set off back to the place he'll now call home. With only half an hour left before 10 PM, he hastily blocked a gap in the shutter with some pieces of wood he found, and then headed up to his new living quarters. Whilst there was clearly a lot of work to do to make this place secure, Steve was definitely in a much better position than the previous night. As he laid his sleeping bag down on the cold concrete floor, he thought,
I'll be okay here. Right?
Until next time.